All right. So, David, uh, tell me, you woke up this morning, saw the results. Were
I'm not sure.
you
I'm not sure I actually went to sleep last night, but
okay? So, let's say you didn't go to sleep, but there was a point at which you had to sit back and look at what happened. Were you surprised? And if so, what were some of the things that surprised you most? Let's start there.
well, I guess I wasn't surprised based on a lot of the reporting I've done over at this point 20 years or so. I don't know how many times the Democratic Party in the country has to learn the lesson that if you run a campaign um, based on the defense of so-called institutions and democracy and all these high-minded ideals out of West Wing, and you don't actually speak to the economic anxieties and material interests of the population, you're probably going to lose. And I think that is the lesson of this election. I mean, I think if you look at the exit polling data, it's incredibly clear.
Yeah, so go into some of those exit poll data that I know that you've been looking at. What are you,
Yeah, I
what
mean,
are the
it's the
stats you're
basic. I
interested
mean,
in?
if you look at the shift from 2020 to today or last night, I mean, here's one stat that I saw. On in 2020, the stat was that Biden won less than people who make less than $50,000 by a 64-33 margin. In this election, um, the number was Trump won it by 49%. So a huge loss, a huge flip from from 2020. I think that's just an incredibly huge flip. Um, there was a stat that I saw that was a similar stat for people under $100,000. So I guess the point is that if you just look at this on the economics, uh, the so-called realignment that's been talked about a lot, where the Republicans are becoming a working class party and the Democrats are becoming an affluent party. I mean, I think that's shows up in the numbers. Yeah, here's the other stat. 2020, Biden won households under $100,000 by 56-43. In 2024, Trump won households under 100,000, 49-48. And I don't accept the idea that this is just racism or misogyny. I don't buy it. I don't think there's evidence for that. I don't think, I mean, yes, there's racism and misogyny at the margins, but I go back to the 2016 election where 200 plus counties that had voted for Obama then voted twice for Obama, then voted for Trump. So, people try to write it off as, oh, well, that's just racism, and that doesn't make sense if Barack Obama had won those counties by two. I mean, my overarching analysis here is that the Democrats have stopped trying to speak in economic class terms to the working class in a downwardly mobile country where the working class is becoming bigger and the middle and affluent class is becoming smaller. And the Democrats' math just doesn't really work in that kind of environment.
And that
Uh, th-
seems to be the takeaway, especially in some of these key swing states that, frankly, uh, are surprising a lot of folks. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina. Do you think that's going to be the big takeaway here? This shift that you're talking about, the demographics and income toward Republicans.
yeah, and I think the big question is, well, why is that happening? Because it's not like the Republicans are not are somehow less of an oligarchic party. I mean, that's the big question. How does a party whose candidate was a inherited real estate billionaire, backed by the richest person on the planet, how is that party allowed? How does the Democratic Party allow that other party to become the populist party of the working class, as the results show. And I think my answer to that is that yes, the Democrats offered a more on policy grounds, a certainly what I think is an agenda that would be more helpful to working class voters. But I think what's gone on is that certainly inflation and the affordability crisis, and being the incumbent party during an affordability crisis is a hard thing to overcome. But I think if you look over a few decades, I think people's perception, a lot of working class people's perception, is that the Democratic Party is a middle and affluent class party that doesn't care about their economic interests, and that frankly, both parties don't really care about people's economic interests. And once you strip out the perception that anyone in the government cares about your material well-being, then campaigns can devolve into what we just experienced, which was essentially a culture war. And when you have if you think both parties aren't really going to represent your economic interests, you blame the incumbent party for the problems in the economy, and then the election just becomes a culture war. That's not a good environment for Democrats. And you add on top of that that the Democratic candidate and the Democratic ticket really didn't make very clear how exactly them winning would immediately and directly materially improve people's lives. I mean, I go back to something that I said at the beginning of this, and this is not like an "I told you so" kind of thing. Although I will say that after 25 years of saying the same stuff and being ostracized and vilified for it by Democratic Party insiders and liberal pundits for my entire adult life, I'm sick of saying it over and over again. Um, but I think it is something I said at the beginning of this when Harris became the nominee. There was a moment right before she appointed Tim Walz to the ticket where Walz was asked, what would be your top priority for Democrats? And he said, I think it was smart. He said, I think our top priority should be pushing for paid family leave. Now, I think paid family leave is a great policy. It's wildly popular. Everyone understands why it's not hard. It's not something that's hard to explain to voters. Walz said that, it was 2 days later, became the Democratic vice presidential nominee, and the party never campaigned on that. Now, I'm not saying that would change the whole election, although it's worth noting that in Nebraska, a very Republican stronghold state, paid family leave, paid sick leave won on the ballot with 75% of the vote. It's almost like there's a lesson there. But I guess the point is bigger than that one policy. It's to say that there were ways for the Democratic Party to campaign on 2, 3, 4, 5 very specific, very easy to understand policies, easy to understand how they would benefit most Americans. And the Democratic Party did not do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It refused to do that.
And, that is one thing that we can be sure of, is that in the next weeks, months, that soul searching within the Democratic Party to find out what went so wrong here is something that will be a big topic. For everyone just joining us right now, just a reminder, I'm Jared Jakang Mayer. I'm a podcast producer here at The Lever, and I'm here with David Sirota, founder and editor-chief of The Lever. We are doing about an hour-long live event where we are making sense of what happened last night with the election and Trump's victory, but not just Trump's victory. We're going to be looking at lots of other issues, and we are taking comments and questions in Zoom. So if you're watching this in Zoom, go ahead and leave a question there. If you're watching this on YouTube, because we're streaming this live on our YouTube channel, go ahead and join the chat there, and we will be trying to integrate your questions in there. Okay, so we're going to move into our first segment, and for this, we're going to bring on Freddie Brewster, a staff reporter for The Lever. Freddie, where are you coming in from?
Coming in from California.
From California out there. And so, Freddie, what we wanted to talk to you about is you were following one of the big concerns, which was election interference, sort of the legal challenges that might have materialized with the election results. And we haven't seen so much of that yet, maybe because with the Trump victory, a lot of those efforts weren't deployed. But maybe talk a little bit about the lack of that. And then also let's talk about the Supreme Court, because it's all the legal challenges uh, all lead back to the Supreme Court, and that is the uh, kind of the bigger unknown thing that uh, we all at the lever are going to be watching is what this means for the court.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Yeah, so last night I kind of spent the night just monitoring Twitter and news outlets for any kind of like election-related lawsuits that popped up, and I didn't really see anything too outstanding. There were a couple about keeping polling locations open longer, but nothing major. And given the results of the election, I think that that has a reason why. It was Trump kind of rocked the country last night. He won pretty easily in a number of swing states. Um, Before the election, I was looking at election-related lawsuits that touched on purging voter rolls, limiting mail-in ballots, a couple other issues. But the main focus of that story was really the motivations behind those lawsuits, and there was quite a bit of funding for some of those lawsuits by groups connected to the Supreme Court mastermind Leonard Leo. We've done quite a bit of reporting about Leonard Leo over the past couple of years. He helped achieve the current conservative majority on the Supreme Court. He's like a dark money mastermind as well. And he has close connections and business ties to the Concord Fund, the 85 Fund, Donors Trust, has, decade-long connections to Virginia Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, and a couple of other, conservative high figures.
And we are going to be getting into dark money and the effects on the
Mhm.
election in a little bit, but let's just really quick shift onto the Supreme Court now. With this Trump victory and a second Trump administration, David, what's your immediate reaction to what it means for the Supreme Court? I don't know if David can hear me right now, but
Sorry,
if
sorry.
yeah,
I'm sorry. My mic went out for the Supreme Court.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, I mean, Sonia Sotomayor is not in great health. Um, uh, Classically, she has declined to retire because that's what Democratic appointed Supreme Court justices now do. They simply do not retire and then allow their seats to be appointed by Republicans. That's now in the Democratic playbook. It feels like, right? I mean, I hate to be super despondent about that specifically, but we went through that
yeah,
with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We're probably going to go through that with Sonia Sotomayor because, I mean, I have lots of theories about how that happens, but there's a careerism inside the Democratic Party, a self-preservation, a focus on, I'm talking about among the high officials of the Democratic Party, a focus on the self, the singular self as savior. That's how Ruth Bader Ginsburg, why she stayed there. She saw herself in sort of, I think, in sort of godlike fashion. I think these people, they get on high. That's how they think of themselves, and they're not really thinking about the country. I mean, certainly Sonia Sotomayor could retire right now,
yeah,
and there could be a Supreme Court battle right now. But that's not the kind of party the Democratic Party is. The Democratic Party, its leadership still is a religion of worshiping so-called institutions, even as the institutions are being torched. So I think we should, without being, catastrophically dark about it, I think the Supreme Court is only going to get worse to the point where the Overton window is going to shift so far that Brett Kavanaugh is going to be considered the liberal on the court at a certain point,
yeah.
probably in our lifetime. And I think we all better understand that. I'm not sure what exactly to do about that, although we explore some of that, at least in Master Plan.
Yeah, and with the conservatives already having a conservative supermajority on the court, and the big fear is deepening that even further with one of the few liberals on the court like Sotomayor. That's a big question, but we certainly will be seeing needing to be preparing for some sort of Supreme Court nomination battle pretty soon because, like you mentioned, Freddie, with figures like Leonard Leo, their fixation on the courts and the money that they've been deploying, this is like they had plan A, right? If Kamala Harris won, and now this is plan B if Trump won. What do you real quickly expect to see? What are you going to be watching for with some of these groups tied to figures like Leonard Leo?
Yeah, one thing I'm watching is, today Facebook has a case pending in front of the case for Facebook is going in front of the Supreme Court this morning. And that case could, if Facebook is successful, it can make it harder to sue corporations, and it could make it harder for, like public disclosure requirements of some of these corporations. There's like a number of other cases coming up as well, such as, rulings coming down for liability shields for gun manufacturers and a couple of other issues. Um, like kind of like David said, there's a lot of aging justices as well on the Supreme Court. Clarence Thomas is 76, Samuel Alito's 74, and I saw there's reporting out this morning about speculation on forcing out Chief Justice John Roberts, so Trump, could appoint 3 more justices potentially, and then also there was an update this morning. As this morning, there's 47 federal court vacancies, and Trump appointed a record number of federal judges during his first term, and so I'm going to be paying attention to those vacancies and who's getting appointed there.
Okay, and along with the Supreme Court, I'm looking in our chat for any questions that we have around the Supreme Court issues. But I would just point people to, if you haven't already, to go listen to our award-winning podcast series, Master Plan, hosted by David Sirota, where David really ties together the entire history of how we got here with the Supreme Court, how it was tied with billionaire money, and it really is illuminating for a lot of folks to know how we ended up in this particular spot. So, okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next segment. I'm going to let you go now, Freddie, and we are going to bring in Helen Santoro, another Lever reporter. Hey, Helen.
Hi, Jared.
Hi, where are you coming in from?
I am coming in from Colorado.
Colorado. Okay, snowy Colorado. That's where I am too. All right. So what we wanted to talk about here was how both the Democrats and Republicans' electoral campaigns were dominated by dark money, and oligarch special interest behind these funds is one of the things that we've really tried to track and follow. So go ahead and let us know, what were you following with this election? Was there anything in particular that in the last day or two that really stuck out for you when it comes to dark money?
Yeah, so this election cycle saw an incredible amount of dark money, potentially more than ever before. There was just under 16 billion in spending, which surpassed 2020's surge of 15.1 billion. So this is a lot of money we're talking about, and a lot of this is dark money, where there's, it's dark because it's changing hands from special interests to nonprofit groups that don't have to disclose their donors. And there's very little transparency around where this money is actually coming from before it gets to a political candidate or campaign. And these, oligarchs, these billionaires, they have special interests. And so therefore we don't know really who's pulling the strings.
And just to highlight that,
campaigns.
you said $15 billion just in
almost
dark
16.
Money. Almost 16 billion. So to break down for people, because there's regular election spending that is tracked one way, and there's something called dark money, and this 15 billion is just highlighting that figure alone, right?
Yeah, and that was thanks to Open Secrets data. They've been tracking this really well throughout the campaign. And yes, so there is, there's political action committees, and there's money that can be tracked through those for these campaigns. And then there's all of this dark money that we don't really know where it's coming from. Most of the reason why there have been some breaking reports on where this dark money is coming from is thanks to reporting, not thanks to transparency standards around election funding. Yeah, so it's very shadowy, and we reported on how it's gone across the board. This is not just a GOP issue. This is also a Democratic Party issue. We were one of the first to report on how Harris, she had a lot to say about dark money and getting it out of politics as during her time as senator and attorney general in California, and yet has accepted a lot of dark money, or did accept a lot of dark money during her own election cycle. So there, yeah, there's special interests pulling the strings across the political landscape, and it will be really interesting. And one of the things I would like to follow is how, now that Trump has been reelected, how those special interests are going to show up.
And David, I want to bring you back in here because a couple days ago, this weekend, we put together kind of a parody video that, if folks haven't seen it, it was a parody of the Avengers Endgame, and we called it the Billionaire Avengers Endgame video, which got a lot of traction before the election, but really highlights. Well, you tell me, what does that video highlight for you?
You know, it's funny, that video. Some people saw that video as pro Kamala Harris. Some people saw it as pro Trump.
Yeah, it was like a Rorschach test of where
yeah.
people were coming from right before the election. Some thought it was too anti-Hillary, not Hillary, too anti-Harris, and some thought it was against Trump. But the overall message was what, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think the people who thought it was one or the other didn't watch the whole video, because towards the end of the video, we get to the actual point, which is that this was the election was an election about trying was supposedly an election about trying to save democracy, while the election itself was destroying democracy. I mean, the process of the election was a trampling of what a democracy is supposed to be. It turned an election into an auction. It turned a political campaign into an exclusive battlefield for billionaires on both sides, and with the rest of us basically off to the side with little power. And I think, you know, if you're worried about the survival of democracy, let me introduce you to 50 years of buying and selling of elections, legislation, court rulings, regulations, et cetera, right? I mean, this election does have implications for democracy, but the democracy crisis is so much bigger than this one election. And I think that we have to recognize that the experience that we just went through is an oligarchy pretending to be a democracy. And I think the difference, to my mind, from this election than other elections, or at least one difference, is that in this case, it wasn't billionaires funding the elections from the sidelines.
That's right.
The billionaires were central characters in the election. Elon Musk was a central character. Mark Cuban was a central character.
Yep.
You know, at a certain point, Reid Hoffman and Barry Diller calling for the firing of Lena Khan. Right? I mean, we are now in a stage where there's no shame. There's no, even in some cases, no desire for anonymity. Although dark money is still a problem, but the lack of desire for anonymity, the desire to be a central character, is something very new. Now, one last point on this. It's new for our generation. It's new for this era, but you can harken back to the era of William Randolph Hearst and his fights with FDR. I mean, this is in some cases this is new, but it's actually very old, and it harkens back to a time of, you know, Gilded Age excesses that I think we are now clearly on the verge of surpassing.
It's undeniable at this point, right? Like, it became a cliche almost to say we're in a new Gilded Age, but the experience of this last election really drives that home and makes it undeniable. And one thing I will say about the Billionaire Avengers parody video that we put together, you know, when I saw that over the weekend, and I was chuckling at it, but what the dark humor in that is that it does feel to me like there are all these billionaires which are inserting themselves up front into these elections. And then the thing about these superhero movies is like the public, like the actual human beings are nowhere in existence. They're all there fighting each other, and the actual public is not part of the story. They're standing, way off on the sidelines. And that's almost where we are right now, where you have, we're all rooting from the sidelines. Are you Elon Musk or Mark Cuban for billionaires? And it's really strange and new and a little bit disconcerting. Okay, so let's go ahead and stay on this topic. We're going to let Helen go, and let's talk more about these ethics issues and bring back in Freddie and bring in Lucy Dean Stockton, an editor here at The Lever. And we're going to dig a little bit more into ethics laws. This kind of touches back on Elon Musk. But let's go ahead and start from there. Lucy, I'll go to you first. Donald Trump has previously defied ethics laws, and now at this point, those laws seem more perilous than ever, with their willingness just to ignore them, go against them, and then actually, undermine them in so many ways. So take it from there. What is this election saying to you that we can expect as far as ethics in government?
Yeah, I mean, I think echoing what David was saying, I was also ready to jump in. I think in previous elections, billionaires have contributed from the sidelines through their dark money groups, and this time they were really out in the open saying the quiet part out loud. But yeah, I think we have them calling for administration changes and quite literally installing themselves in administrations, like in the case of Elon Musk, who has already been a staple in the administration, or like in the government. He reaps a ton of profit from the government every year, 3 billion just last year across 100 different contracts with his company, his two companies, Tesla and SpaceX. And now he's gunning for a position in the Trump administration. Obviously, he has been extremely active on the campaign trail, but he's also reaching for a position in the cabinet that would put him in hot water with many conflict of interest laws, but would also potentially allow him to take advantage of special tax loopholes, as we reported. I think there are other major concerns around around our ethics laws, given just like Trump's previous history.
Yeah.
A common theme in his previous presidency was just a true contempt for ethics laws. There were ethics questions in the Russia investigations, in his diplomatic relations with China, in membership issues with Mar-a-Lago. He never fully divested from his companies. He just gave them to his sons to run. He is truly has contempt for ethics standards. And this time around, he's actually might be in an even better position to not just defy them, but get rid of them altogether. I think what's coming up right now is that the Office of Government Ethics is it's up for reappointment. Right now, there is no chair, and while Biden has nominated David Hutrama for the position, it's actually being stalled and sabotaged by Senate GOP lawmakers, including and particularly Mike Lee, former President Donald Trump's top ally in the Senate.
And those kind of key positions within government is something that people don't see every day, that they don't pay attention to, but it's something that here at The Lever, we've certainly been paying attention to that, and we'll continue following where those roles go, because to us, those might be the first things to go away when the people that want to influence government, want to deepen those business interests. And having this overt intertwining of business interests with the candidates and being so upfront about it is something that feels like it's something new. And we actually have a question or a comment, at least in the Q&A. Is anyone going to talk about Thiel's crowd and their influence? So I assume that's Peter Thiel. So Freddie, you're out there in California. Go ahead and take that one. What do people need to know about Peter Thiel and that whole group of Silicon Valley billionaires um,
I mean,
supporting Trump?
they're the ascendant ideology in the Republican Party right now. Um,
And by
JD
they,
Vance.
yeah, name some of these folks and how they're connected for audience members that might not know.
Yeah, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, these types of guys who are they're the venture capitalist of Silicon Valley. They're not necessarily the, software engineer designers themselves, like you would see with like Mark Benioff and Salesforce, who are largely Democratic donors. These are the guys who are invested in those companies. And these are also the guys who have, been extremely pissed about Gary Gensler's tough positions on crypto, on CFPB regulations, and these are some of the guys who want to roll some of that back. Um, you know, Peter Thiel is, or excuse me, JD Vance is deeply connected to Peter Thiel. He used to work for him. You know, JD Vance, I grew up 45 minutes away from where JD Vance did. And, the way he plays up his, working class roots, or, it's legit. He did have a tough upbringing, but he's a creature of Yale Law School and Silicon Valley. He's not a creature of Middletown, Ohio. He knows how to talk in some of those regards, but his ideology is formed from these high institutions that have long dominated the public sphere and have pushed the country in a rightward position.
And
You
like you
know,
said, his fast political ascendancy is tracked back to one person in particular, Peter Thiel.
exactly. Yeah. And Peter Thiel, for people to know who he is, he's like a long kind of like dark money in lawsuits. He was behind the Gawker lawsuit in the early 2010s. He's the CEO and founder of Palantir, which is a surveillance company. Um, and he just has deep interest in government contracts, largely some surveillance stuff.
And I have to bring back, David, the reporting that the Lever has done and that you've really highlighted uh, so thoroughly on social media, this fact that Elon Musk potentially getting a position somehow in the Trump administration, and what that would mean for some of the laws that sort of try to root out corruption when it comes to government contractors getting these types of roles. Explain that story for the audience, and now that that's come to fruition, what do you think is going to happen with that?
Yeah, so the laws that are enforced by the Office of Government Ethics are supposed to prevent explicit conflicts of interest among high government officials in the executive branch. And Elon Musk has been promised and said he would accept a position in the Trump administration to oversee the cutting of the budget, essentially the privatization of various government services, of which Elon Musk obviously has a personal financial interest in the sense that his companies are government contractors. The more you privatize government, the more money there potentially is for government contracts. So it's a clear conflict of interest, and what the laws are supposed to do is create a choice. Either you can serve in government and divest yourself of the holdings that create a conflict of interest, or you cannot serve in government. Seems to me that what's going to happen is that Musk is going to, that there's going to be a choice for him. But that the choice will be kind of rigged with a third choice. Under the existing laws, the choice I just laid out is supposed to be the choice. And if you choose to divest, you're given a very special tax gift. If you are compelled to divest your holdings because of a conflict of interest problem, you get to defer all of the capital gains taxes on the sale of what you're required to divest, which in Elon Musk's case, divesting from Tesla and divesting from SpaceX would create the largest single tax gift in the history of the United States of America for him if he divested. Now, the third option for him relates to the story that Lucy just discussed, which is that in a sense, the Trump administration could put a crony in now because they've held that spot open for more than a year at the Office of Government Ethics. They could put a crony in to simply not enforce or waive the ethics laws, allowing Elon Musk to oversee the government programs that directly impact and could enrich his business. They could just waive those laws essentially so that Elon Musk he wouldn't get the tax gift for divesting, but he'd be in a position to use his position in government to further enrich the companies and the assets that he holds.
And that is, one of the many stories that at the Lever we will continue to follow, that people supporting the Lever through becoming a paid supporter or just becoming a free subscriber, you are helping to keep our newsroom going, to help all the reporters you're seeing around the country dig into a lot of corruption, a lot of things that groups people would rather you ignore or just normalize and get used to. And brings us to our thanks for now. And let's talk about climate issues, because this is one thing that wasn't a big campaign issue, at least when it came to a lot of the topics that people were pushing on the campaign trail. But this is probably one of the most significant elections when it comes to efforts to fight climate change. And for this, we're going to bring in Lois Parsley, a senior investigative reporter for The Lever, who covers environmental issues for us. So, Lois, break down for us what you're looking at right now when it comes to climate change, now that you know the results of the election.
Thanks, Jared. Well, to start, we are clearly not on track to meet the global Paris Agreement climate goals, which Trump has pledged to withdraw from again, which means that we probably can't hold warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. A big part of the recent problem is a surge in global electricity demand and the growth of the use of AI. An investigation I reported on this summer. This fall, we've seen many big tech companies walking back their green energy commitments. And as president, Trump is going to contribute to these slipping benchmarks at a really critical time. The next 5 years are a super important window in which we have a chance to reduce emissions and limit future warming and all the catastrophes that it will bring. But as you mentioned, even 2 massive hurricanes in October didn't get the presidential candidates to center climate. It was a total afterthought on the campaign trail. And that's really stupid, because climate undergirds a lot of the topics that they did hotly debate, like immigration, climate change, rising sea levels, extreme weather. It's already contributing to migration. And as precarious living conditions get worse, there's likely going to be mass displacement. By the end of the century, 1/3 of people are predicted to live in places no longer suitable for human survival.
And what do you think this change in administration means for some of the efforts to fight climate change, even dealing with the impacts of climate change? Because that's something that you've covered as well, that different industries are now recognizing that climate change is happening, and they are moving to try to protect themselves or cause other disruptions in how people live their lives, not just increased temperatures and weather patterns.
Yeah, so I feel like it's summed up by the fact that oil stocks surged this morning. Donald Trump has close ties to the fossil fuel industry. He notoriously demanded $1 billion in campaign funds last spring in exchange for gutting environmental regulations, and I have every expectation that he will live up to those promises. In his past presidency, he undercut protections for just about everything: clean air, water, public lands. He sought to silence government scientists. In his next presidency, he's vowed to rescind funding for Biden's landmark climate law, the Inflation Reduction Act, although that will require an act of Congress to actually do. He's also vowed to tear up rules to reduce methane, a really important greenhouse gas emission. He's promised to cut funding to the EPA. He plans to amplify the agency's corporate capture, which is something else I reported on this summer, limits its ability to support any kind of green energy transition, weaken its ability to regulate dangerous chemicals killing Americans like PFAS. Trump and his allies laid out plans in Project 2025 that would eliminate the agency's ability to regulate future emissions. And their approach was so extreme that a major oil executive actually warned Trump this week that his Wild West approach to regulating fossil fuels was a bad idea. One of the people to watch in all of this is Daniel Giorgiani. He served as the top solicitor at the Interior during Trump's first term, and he's been very involved with conservative mega donors like Charles and David Koch, currently serving as the chief operating officer for the far-right advocacy group Citizens United. He's been working with Trump allies to write up plans for the Interior Department that will vastly expand oil and gas development in places like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, as well as mining and protected lands around the country. It's all basically bad news.
And the staffing of some of these key agencies is really going to be the story of the next several months as Trump puts together these different teams and figures, and just the overtness of the transactional nature between Trump literally demanding campaign donations, a certain amount from the fossil fuel industry, and basically getting it. And that was like a tiny story within a year of really, really big stories. And David, last question on this topic. This gets back to sort of the normalization of corruption that you've been talking about in Master Plan. What do you make of that when it comes to the fossil fuel industry and the Trump administration, and just how out front they are with their plans to have influence over the government?
I don't have much good or hopeful to say about climate policy in particular. I mean, I do think there are things that Donald Trump could do on various economic policies that are that there's places to find political overlap with Democrats. I mean, potentially on antitrust, what J.D. Vance has said about Lena Khan, positive comments, more positive comments than Kamala Harris ever said about Lena Khan and antitrust enforcement, which is really telling. But I think on climate policy, I mean, that is truly the most apocalyptic part of this election, I think. Donald Trump was openly solicitous of making a deal with fossil fuel industry donors in a transaction. Give me money, I'll give you the fossil fuel, the climate policies, the climate rollbacks that you want. And I think we should expect that to happen. And I think when people said this was the most important election of our lifetime, I think you can zero in on that as kind of true when it comes to the physical sciences. And there's really nothing comforting to say, except perhaps that the investments in clean energy that have started are bringing down the relative price of renewable energy to make it cost competitive with fossil fuel energy, and that at a certain point the market may have its own say. And so we're near that tipping point, I think, in terms of the market intervening to say, actually, the less bad sources of energy vis-a-vis the climate are more economical. And I think that'll put Trump and the Trump administration into a weird position, potentially, of defending a set of energy sources that don't make as much business sense as they once did. That's what I'll be watching for.
Yeah, that'd be a little bit of a brain scramble on their ends as they try to justify actual clean energy investments when it sort of suits them. But you had mentioned David, Lena Khan, and the FTC, and I want to move on to that topic. So we're going to say goodbye to Lois. Thank you, Lois. And before we move on to our next topic, I just want to remind everyone that live events like this by The Lever are paid for and are usually exclusive to our premium paid subscribers to the lever. This is a special case, and we're making it open to everybody. So if you are a paid subscriber, thank you so much for your support, for allowing us to do this type of event, allowing us to do this type of journalism and podcasts. And if you're not already a member, please go to levernews.com and follow the links there, and consider becoming a paid subscriber or a free subscriber. We have also lots of newsletters and other options for folks, however they can contribute or participate. And our marketing director, Nick, wants me to highlight that we also have if you want to make a one-time donation to the Lever, please go to levernews.com/donate, and you can just make a one-time donation and help us move all these issues forward that we're covering here. So let's get back to consumer and worker issues. For this, we're going to bring in Katya Schwenk, one of our reporters here at the Lever who's covered this. Hey, Katya.
Hey, Jared. Good to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about Lena Khan and the Trump administration and how they, this new administration really represents a massive threat and a historic shift toward efforts to fight monopolist growth and pro-worker policies. And what are you looking at from this election? And did anything surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, I think despite the failures, the broken promises of the Biden administration, like Lena Khan and, this kind of new pro-worker, pro-consumer leadership, Rohit Chopra at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau have really, in a sense, sort of over the last few years, ushered in like a real new era of anti-monopolist policy, really revived that. And I think at the same time, and this is a thread we've been chasing in our reporting for the last few years, this has drawn in a new unprecedented era of pushback from corporate interests who feel threatened by, Lena Khan and the FTC taking on Amazon in the way that they are, taking on big tech in new, unprecedented ways, sort of using anti-monopoly law in a way that it hasn't been used in decades. And so I think, and David alluded to this earlier, sort of I think it was predictable that corporate interests would go after the FTC, go after the CFPB and what they're doing, the kinds of protections that they've handed down for workers. But it has been, I think, pretty stunning to watch them, people like Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, billionaires like Reid Hoffman, major donors, like really attack figures like Lena Khan and Rohit Chopra in the way that they have this election. And I think the Trump victory last night and the way the stocks, big banks stocks are reacting to that is a sign of, the threat that he poses to these kinds of consumer protections.
And let me kick this to David. David, you've interviewed Lena Khan and followed this issue pretty closely. How long do you think Lena has, if at all? Do you think she's out the door right away in a new administration?
No, I don't. I don't necessarily. I mean, I think she has to serve out her term. And the term, I think, is a 5-year term. So that's the first thing. I mean, whether she gets, I forget the process of whether she gets reappointed, but I think on whether Donald Trump, Trump Vance administration gets rid of her specifically, I think that's an open question. I think J.D. Vance in particular seems wired into the antitrust movement. We're going to see whether that's rhetoric or something real.
And by that, you mean he actually in the past and some other conservatives had said positive things about
right.
Lena Khan and some of the efforts they're doing around antitrust.
Right. And I think that Harris's reticence on that issue was indicative of, I don't necessarily think that flipped the election, obviously. I don't know how many specific, FTC voters there were out there, but I think it was emblematic of a campaign that was trying to be all things to all people and ended up being nothing to lots of people. And I think
Yep.
we're going to see with Trump whether this alleged Republican realignment around populist economic issues is anything real. And I think the first place to watch is the FTC, the antitrust regulators, because those issues do not break down along party lines among the electorate. I mean, those are cross-party
Yep. They're
consensus
popular
issues.
among
Yes.
Republicans and working class voters
Yeah,
writ large.
that's right.
And Katya, maybe one last thing on this topic. What is there anything else that you picked up on in this election, whether it comes to consumer or worker issues or anything else that surprised you that you want to highlight here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this election, you know, I was like everyone else looking at the exit polling that showed, you know, just how much concerns about the economy, concerns about worker protections, were directing people's votes, you know, the victories of things like, you know, sick leave and minimum wage. But, you know, I think it's important to mention that, you know, we are going to see a real impact, I think, on the NLRB in perhaps new ways, different ways than we saw even during the first administration in the months ahead. You know, there's a push to potentially even overturn the National Labor Relations Act, you know, through the courts, which could pose a serious threat to worker issues. So I think we're seeing this strange tension between people sort of voting apparently based on their economic concerns and now sort of the threat that a new administration may pose to them.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to move on from this topic. Thank you, Katya. And so far in this live event, we've covered some pretty big issues: dark money corporate spending, the Supreme Court, climate issues. And now let's move on to another big issue that and assess where things stand with it: healthcare. So we'll bring back in Helen again. Hey, Helen. And
Hi
also let's
again.
bring in Amos Barshad, our senior enterprise reporter, to talk about how Trump has a history of cutting healthcare funding during his last presidency, and he's made it clear that he plans to do it again this time around. And this could mean a lot of change around the Affordable Care Act, Medicare Advantage, reproductive health. So let's go ahead and start there. Helen, you go first. How should our audience think about healthcare and what this election means for that topic?
Yeah, I think unfortunately a bit similar to what Lois was saying about climate change. There's not much good to say about in terms of support and funding from the federal government moving forward with Trump's presidency. You know, he slashed a lot of funding last time around to Medicare, Social Security, federal healthcare programs. He's made it very clear he wants to do that this time, you know, going as far as to say he wants to put RFK in charge of Health and Human Services, which is definitely concerning given RFK's history. Yeah, it's a bit of a definitely a space that I'm going to be watching very carefully, and one that can affect millions of people. For example, just the Affordable Care Act. There's 45 million Americans that rely on the Affordable Care Act, and we know that from the past that Trump is not a fan of the Affordable Care Act and has very much said that he, you know, wants to slash funding. JD Vance has said we should create pools of people who have pre-existing conditions or make separate insurance pools for those who are sick versus those who are healthy. So lots of people are likely going to be affected by in terms of their healthcare coverage and accessibility.
And Amos, why don't you jump in here? Talk about medical insurance and, you know, what should we be watching out for when it comes to how people are insured in this country? I know that you've covered a lot of these issues.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I was actually just in Allentown, Pennsylvania recently, and we put the piece up. I published it just before the election, and we were looking at the fact that something like $500 million had been spent in that state by both campaigns combined, and very little of that ad spending was used to talk about healthcare. And this has been noted throughout the campaign that healthcare has not been a prominent issue, despite the fact of kind of what I saw in Allentown, which was a free medical clinic serving people that just needed that care desperately. People were sleeping in their cars overnight to make sure that they got in early enough to get this care. And a lot of it, I think what's really eye opening is maybe you think about uninsured people, but the reality is something like half of working age adults are underinsured, you're insufficiently insured. So it means they may have some sort of coverage, but maybe through their workplace, but it doesn't cover medical or dental necessarily. So sorry, dental or vision. So a lot of people are coming in for dental care, and these can become really debilitating dental issues when they're not attended to. Which is just to say that this is obviously a huge thing, like Helen was saying, to kind of underline that. But the fact is that Trump, either calculatedly or just kind of off the cuff, as he does tend to seem to do things, he downplayed it completely. During the debate, he famously said he had concepts of a plan, and people I think took that to mean that he's not thinking about it, which may well be the case. But I think people I spoke with, people who are advocates for single payer, universal health care, were like, this he does have a plan, and that plan is to turn insurance over to the corporate insurers. That this is the goal in many ways, and specifically how that could come in is through Project 2025. The goal, the stated goal is to set Medicare Advantage, the privatized version of Medicare, as the option for all Medicare enrollees. Something that would be massive, and analysts of saying that would could bankrupt the Medicare funding within 5 years because of how expensive those plans are to the government. And something a little bit shorter term, something that seems like it would almost certainly happen is the subsidy. There's something like 20 million people currently getting subsidies for their Obamacare marketplace plans. Those subsidies are set to expire at the end of 2025, and so it's looking like the Trump administration will certainly not renew those. They've said they won't. So it can go from something as, I guess you could say, small picture as is the subsidies expiring, to big picture to Medicare Advantage becoming even bigger. It's growing currently, and it could get even bigger.
And Amos, before we move on from this topic, I just have to ask David, given how pivotal this election was for health insurance and people's ability to get insured, why wasn't it a bigger issue on the campaign? Why wasn't it a bigger election issue being pushed by Republicans or Democrats?
Well, I think this goes to the heart of what a democracy crisis is. I mean, most everyone in the country is one or two medical emergencies away from financial peril, if not financial catastrophe, and this wasn't even a topic of conversation in the election. That is the democracy crisis. I think that the Democrats feel like the safest position between what the public wants and what their donors want is simply a defense of the Affordable Care Act, the status quo, which the health insurance industry loves. So they've decided that's a safe position. They ran campaigns explicitly, the Democratic Party did, against Medicare for All when Bernie Sanders proposed it. And the Republicans, they're the right side of the conversation. They want to further enrich the insurance companies. So I think the big money has narrowed the scope of the debate to something that the insurance companies really like, which is the status quo, or something the insurance companies want even more, which is a more deregulated insurance system. I wrote a book a long time ago called Hostile Takeover. It was my first book. It was about how corruption operates, not just to buy votes and legislation, but it buys the choices that we think we have. So that the idea is that if you narrow the choices, if you're a big money interest and you narrow the choices down to only choices that will enrich you, you ultimately don't care which choice is really made. You don't even have to buy votes if the choices that are being presented to the public are choices that you like and will be enriched by. And I think healthcare proves that. That's what we have with healthcare. We have one party proposing, the left side, put that in quotes, the left side of the debate is to protect the status quo that the insurance industry loves. And the right side of the debate is to turn it into an insurance system that the insurers love even more. So in a sense, that debate is fully locked down. That is the democracy crisis, and that is the corruption crisis at work.
Okay, everyone. So we're about at the hour right now of our Lever News live event, breaking down the election results. I think what we'll do is go ahead and go for another 15 minutes and try to take some questions from the audience. Some of our reporters and David, they might, if they can stick around, they'll stay on this call and answer some of these questions. Let's take this question from Michael Scott. Do you think that the Democratic Party genuinely wants to win elections, or are politicians' options so lucrative in the private sector that they don't need to win government office to achieve the power and status they seek? All right, that's a perfect question for David. So why don't you take that?
Well, I think on a politician by politician level, there's obviously self-interest, self-preservation, looking ahead to jobs, campaign contributions, and the like. And I think the sum of the parts are the sum of the whole. So I think that, yeah, it can seem like the Democratic Party doesn't really care much about winning elections, but I don't think that's exactly true. I would say that the Democratic Party is a party that is always trying to find the position that somehow satisfies what voters want and satisfies what its donors want. And those things are often in conflict. And so what the party tends to campaign on are the things that somehow don't offend the donors and do things that voters want, but that's a very narrow list. Defense of reproductive rights doesn't defend the donor class, is something that lots and lots of people clearly want, according to survey data. So that's why that issue, in part, is central in the campaign. But the issues that might offend the donor class that the voters actually want, those are often not discussed at all because of the money. And so that's why you typically have such a limited, narrow agenda for the Democrats. The Republicans, I mean, their formula is different. They advocate for what the donors want, but they name a set of villains, cultural villains that they perceive among their base, immigrants, LGBTQ people, et cetera, et cetera. That's their formula. I think I guess that's a long way of saying I don't think the Democrats are trying to lose. It's just that their formula makes it very hard for them to win.
And along with that, we have a question from YouTube. Can you give me the top 5 reasons Harris lost and lost so bad? That might be a question that we're all having, and I'll even throw this out to the group. You can say top 5, or if someone wants to highlight at least one of the reasons why they think that Harris lost and lost so bad. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I would like to say something that we've seen in the chat, and especially among younger voters, is just how the issue of arms funding to Israel and how the conflict in Palestine has been handled and actually ignored. Again and again, polls showed that positive movement, protecting people in Palestine and refusing to continue to send arms to Israel was a major issue for Democratic voters and just was almost ignored and defied. by the campaign. It was really, really disappointing. And I think that honestly, the election could have gone quite differently if that had been made a major campaign issue. It's especially true with young voters, many of whom I know personally didn't vote, voted for third-party candidates because it had become a single issue vote for them. And also for Muslim voters, especially in the Midwest, who voted with an uncommitted, tried all different ways to show their discontent with the issue, and then were largely ignored. That's one of the first things that comes to mind.
Okay, anyone else? Top 5 reasons Harris lost.
Yeah, one thing that I've been wondering about, I mean, this stems from the Biden administration and, and the Harris campaign as well, is that they never really highlighted their consumer protection wins that they've done with the FTC, the CFPB, or even really some of the airline rules that, Secretary Pete helped usher in. I think those are like bread and butter issues that will improve people's lives. And you really didn't hear the administration and, by extension, the Harris campaign really highlight those.
And any other thoughts on top 5 reasons why Harris lost?
Yeah, well, I would completely second what Freddie just said, which was, there was some lip service to price gouging, things like that. But, I think like what you could think of are, the sort of central pillars of Biden's legacy in terms of consumer protections was just really missing. And then at the same time, Harris somehow also, I feel like, failed to distinguish herself from Biden as a candidate, seemed very, despite his clear unpopularity, was really unwilling to go after him, to like sort of enunciate to voters what she would do differently, while at the same time, like sort of failing to tout, I think, the biggest wins of the administration. So, that's what's on my mind thinking about it.
Okay, David, last word on this one. You probably have a top 10 reasons, but what are your top 1 or 2 why Harris lost?
I think it comes down to the fact that it wasn't clear how her winning would materially benefit the average voter. I mean, there's a lot of ways to unpack that, but I think most people listening here cannot really answer that question other than to say she would not do things worse than Donald Trump would do them. So it's sort of a negative argument. But there wasn't, if Kamala Harris gets elected, here is how my life will materially benefit. That was not articulated. There wasn't even really an effort to articulate that in any serious way. And so here we are, and I think that if you don't articulate that and people are angry about the economic status quo, which they should be, despite Democratic pundits telling them that they're ungrateful, they're ingrates for not feeling better about the economy, which I don't think, obviously, I think that's horrible to say to people who are struggling through an economy that on the macro level, the macroeconomic stats are decent, but the microeconomic lived experience is not for many, if not most people. If you don't articulate what specifically you're going to do, how the election will specifically benefit people in a clear, understandable way, you're probably going to lose.
And I'm going to close out with 2 comments that we saw in the chat. And these kind of get to some things that I've been wondering, given that under a new Trump administration, just the atmosphere for journalism, journalists, the media is certainly going to be a lot tougher and different than we've expected. And we had a comment from Richard Wallach. Do you think organizations like The Lever are going to be left to continue with these investigations that bring forward things that interfere with their agenda? And along with that, we had Jim Rezer say, how concerned are you about being Trump's silencing progressive opposition for media outlets like The Lever? So let's just bring that around here as folks, since we have journalists around the country here, maybe raise your hand and answer that question. A, how concerned are you? And B, is that going to interfere with what we do at The Lever?
I'm,
I was
go ahead,
just,
Helen.
oh, yeah, I was just gonna say that echo Jared, what you messaged to us this morning before this event that really stood out to me, and I agree with, in that the work we're doing now here at the Lever of exposing what's happening behind the scenes, who's influencing what, who's pulling the strings of policies is more important than ever. Um, Journalism has been in a precarious state as an industry for a while, but I personally think our work is more vital than ever with the outcome of this election. And I don't see anyone on this team stopping the work or changing the work, altering it in any way anytime soon.
I
And
actually,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead,
I
Kat,
just wanted to
or
say,
Lucy.
I mean, I think I am a little more paranoid than my colleagues. I do worry, I think, about censorship and serious legal issues that we may face. Um, but I also think that right now, I know we say it all the time, it's more important than ever to invest in an independent media ecosystem. I think especially in sort of the last few non-endorsements we saw from major corporate media outlets, for example, the Washington Post, just days before the election, declined to endorse Kamala Harris after Jeff Bezos stepped in, is a pretty clear example of billionaires not just openly speaking through the election to voice their preferences, but also speaking through the news organizations that they run. I think that we have a chance right now to change the media ecosystem, and that independent news is going to be a major part of keeping a democratic process alive. So yeah, I guess I just want to sort of say a huge thank you to the subscribers we have that make this work possible. I really think you should feel good about where your money goes. And this actually is one of the most important. I mean, many people ask for what individual actions they can take in this moment, and I do. Obviously, it's a selfish plug, but I do think this is one of the major important material actions that you can take, is supporting independent media.
David, is in the coming year, does this new reality change how you think about the work of the Lever?
Actually, no, it doesn't. I mean, I think this is what we exist to do, is to expose the things that give people information to know what their government is doing, for the purposes of acting upon it. And I think that becomes just as important now as it's been in the past. I think we are living in an oligarchy that has still some modicum of small d democratic protections, one of them being for a free press. It is more now than ever a Citizen Kane style free press, or at least dominated by the Citizen Kanes of the current era. We're a different model. I think if you can't see that the existing media models that dominate the discourse are broken, corrupt, and part of the problem, I think you're not being honest with yourself. I think that lots of liberals in this country in particular are ensconced in an elite media ecosystem, hermetically sealed inside of that, an elite media system that teaches them that nothing has to fundamentally change in the economy. Nothing has to change when it comes to class status among the affluent, and that their Democratic Party can simply continue winning elections and everyone can go back to brunch. And that's what they hear every day. And that is why I think a lot of people have woken up shocked this morning.
Yeah.
I didn't wake up particularly shocked. I mean, I wasn't happy, but I wasn't particularly surprised. And I think it's because I've chosen not to be inside that hermetically sealed bubble. Sometimes I wish I was in that hermetically sealed bubble because it might be a nice, more comfortable existence to be deluded all the time. Kind of the old Matrix metaphor. Just eat the steak and ignorance is bliss. But I think if you want to know what's going on in reality, I think, and you are a non-MAGA kind of person, I think you're going to need to break out of where you're getting your news in a very real way and realize that the reason you are bewildered by what's going on is because you are inside of a media bubble in which millionaires paid by billionaires are telling you that billionaires and millionaires never have to sacrifice or change anything for the good of the rest of the hundredaires in this country. And that's what we try to shine a spotlight on in our work. And so I just want to reiterate a big thank you to everybody who's tuned in, everybody who subscribes to The Lever. I hope you will continue to subscribe. I hope you'll make one-time donations at the donation button down there. And I hope you will support independent media across the board because that is something that can directly combat this dark era that we're in and that we're going to be moving forward into.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and close it out with that. And to remind people that if you go to levernews.com, you can follow the support button to find out how to become a paid subscriber and not only support the work that we do, but also you'll get invited to bonus live events like this. We have bonus content. We have bonus podcasts behind the paywall, articles that really will help you stay informed about all the things that are going on. If you so choose to be one of the people that chooses to go through these next coming years, staying informed and aware of where the where things are going, or you can, tune it out and like David said, exist in a nice bliss. But we know that our subscribers are devoted to the former. So I invite you to become a subscriber, or you can donate one time at levernews.com/donate, and you can see it that your money is going to go directly to myself and the other reporters that you saw here on this call to continue doing this work. So I thank you all for joining us in this live event. You can watch a repeat of this video on our Lever News channel on YouTube. So go to YouTube and search for Lever News and become a subscriber there. And thank you all. And we'll have lots more coming your way.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.